Step back. This doesn't concern you. I'm not interfering, just making sure he's okay. You fit the same damn profile. Hands where I can see them. I'm a veteran. You need to calm down. I don't care who you say you are. You people always think the rules don't apply. I said I'm not resisting, and I said I don't care. Turn around now. The wind swept through east-central Spokane with the sharp, unsettled breath of October. The sky hung low in a heavy sheet of gray, and dry mountain air carried dead leaves in small, spiraling bursts along the sidewalk. On a quiet block lined with weathered two-story houses, Jarrett Eccles crouched at the edge of his front porch, a rusted screwdriver in hand, working silently to realign a warped metal railing. He didn't rush. His movements were slow, exact, as if rehearsed. The porch. Boards creaked under his boots, the same boots he had worn for years, even long after leaving active duty. He lived alone, without family, without visitors, except for a German shepherd that slept near the back fence. No music played, no television inside, just the sound of metal scraping against wood and the wind shifting between the trees. At 49, Jarrett had seen more than he ever spoke of. A former Navy SEAL with 2 tours in Afghanistan, a leg scarred by shrapnel, and shoulders trained to carry both weight and silence. Since his honorable discharge, he had made a life out of stillness. He worked as an instructor at a local rehabilitation center for injured veterans, teaching them control of breath, of motion, of memory. He didn't argue politics, didn't watch cable news, didn't shout. But inside him lived a wired sense of justice rooted deep, coiled tight, always alert. At precisely 6:41 p.m., a sharp voice echoed from down the block. Jarrett stood upright. It came from near the corner market, a tired convenience store with flickering signs in a cracked parking lot. 100 meters, maybe less. He scanned the scene with the same clarity he once used in a war zone. A man, mid-40s, stood by a dark sedan. His hands were raised, palms out. 2 police officers flanked him, one lean and silent, the other stockier, face flushed, movements erratic. Their squad car sat askew behind the sedan, its lights pulsing against the storefront. There was no siren, just the aggressive shape of bodies and the tension that hung in the air between them. Jarrett's gaze narrowed. From where he stood on the porch, he saw the pattern clearly. An unjustified stop, a misjudged man, the kind of thing that started quiet but spiraled fast. The older officer advanced. There was no pause, just a sudden lunge, a shove. The man bent forward, wrists yanked back, cuffs clicked into place. The man didn't resist. He said something, likely an explanation, a protest, but his words disappeared beneath the sharp rhythm of commands. Jarrett stepped off his porch. His strides were measured. He didn't run. He didn't call out. He moved with purpose, not panic. His presence was deliberate, a calm entry into the circle forming at the edge of the lot. He kept his hands visible. He kept his voice low, his posture respectful, but unwavering. He wasn't a threat. But to the wrong man, his steadiness could be mistaken for defiance. The older officer noticed him. A brief flicker of hesitation passed over his face, then vanished. Without warning, he closed the gap, gripped Jarrett's arm, and twisted him around. The metal bit into Jarrett's wrists before the officer even asked a question. The other officer stayed still, watching, avoiding. Jarrett didn't resist. He knew better. Resistance wasn't power. It was invitation. So he stood still. His breathing slowed. His gaze lifted, scanning the windows. On the second floor of a house across the street, a curtain shifted. A woman leaned forward, phone in hand. 2 kids appeared on the sidewalk. A teenager, maybe 15, held up his phone and began to record. The cuffs were too tight. The ground was cold. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was what had just begun. Something had shifted. The moment had frozen into something, larger than the night. And Jarrett, even as he stood with wrists bound, knew with absolute clarity this would not be forgotten. Inside the Spokane Police Department, the halls were sterile and dim, washed in a tired gray that matched the overcast sky outside. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead as Jarrett Eccles was led through the narrow corridors like a nameless figure, another shadow passing through the system. His hands remained cuffed behind him, his shoulders squared, his gaze fixed ahead. He said nothing. No questions were asked. No one offered explanation or acknowledgement. His identification remained back at the house, his VA card, his medals, his discharge papers, all of it lying untouched in a drawer beside his bed. His phone sat on the kitchen table, still plugged into the charger. No one asked who he was. No one paused to wonder why a man of his age, built like a soldier, moved with such deliberate calm. They processed him without thought, without suspicion of error, as though his presence alone justified the steel around his wrists. They placed him in a holding cell with concrete walls and a steel bench bolted to the floor. The air smelled of dust and dried sweat. Time passed slowly in that room. No clock, no sound but the occasional footsteps in the hall. Jarrett sat still, his back straight, his breathing steady. The echo of control, ingrained over years, held firm. But beneath that silence, something else moved. An awareness, sharpened by experience, that something larger had already begun outside those walls. While the building remained silent, the world outside began to stir. The video of the arrest, shaky and grainy but unmistakable, had started to spread. First in group chats, then on local forums, then wider. A black man, arrested without resistance. No words exchanged, no struggle, just force, cuffs, and silence. The face was unmistakable to those who had known him in uniform. The posture, the bearing, the calm, it all spoke louder than any caption ever could. In living rooms across the country, 3 retired generals watched the video separately. Each had served with Jarrett Eccles in different times and places: Fallujah, Kandahar, Mosul. One of them, General Clarence Haywood, paused the clip and leaned forward. He remembered that face, remembered the way Jarrett had pulled wounded men from a burning convoy under sniper fire, how he refused to leave until the last soldier was safe. He knew exactly who he was seeing, and he understood immediately what had gone wrong. The calls began shortly after. Haywood contacted the local authorities first, then the state officials. There was no press release, no viral campaign, only quiet authority moving through the channels it had always known. Requests were made. Files were opened. Pentagon Legal Counsel reached out through secured lines. A letter from the Congressional Veterans Caucus was drafted and transmitted. The weight of the system began to shift, not quickly, not loudly, but with the certainty of something that could not be ignored. Meanwhile, inside the station, Officer Hobbs sat at a desk under flickering lights, drafting his version of the report. He wrote of non-compliance. He wrote of resistance. He constructed the kind of justification that had worked in the past. He didn't know, couldn't have known, that the balance had already tipped beyond his control. The shift supervisor, a man used to routine and paperwork, answered the first call from the county prosecutor's office. He dismissed it at first, until the second call came, this time from a secure federal line. Minutes later, a printed letter from a decorated veterans organization arrived by fax, stamped and signed, calling for an immediate inquiry into the unlawful detention of a known service member with distinguished military honors. 3 hours after his arrest, Jarrett was released. No apology was offered, no paperwork handed over. The same officers who had dragged him in now averted their eyes. They unlocked the cuffs in silence and gestured vaguely toward the door. Jarrett didn't argue. He didn't speak. He stepped outside into the wind. The air had changed. The street outside the department was not empty. A small crowd had gathered. Neighbors, co-workers, strangers who had seen the footage and come not to protest, but to bear witness. Some held phones, others just stood still, watching. They didn't chant, they didn't shout. They waited. Jarrett scanned their faces as he passed through them. Some nodded quietly. A few lowered their eyes. He kept walking, his boots clicking softly on the pavement. The sky above was darker now, the wind colder, leaves lifted in spinning gusts and scattered into the air. No one touched him. No one stopped. Him! But everyone there knew what they had seen, and Jarrett, without saying a word, knew the line had been crossed. The silence around him was no longer passive. It was charged, and it would not stay still. The story of Jarrett Echols moved through Spokane like a slow-burning fuse. It didn't explode on national headlines or crash into the evening broadcasts across the country, but it settled deeply into the fabric of the region. Local news stations aired segments with cell phone footage showing frame after frame of Jarrett's arrest. Commentators used phrases like unjustified, troubling, and concerning. The tone was careful, but the message was clear. Something had gone wrong. The public response was immediate. Neighborhood groups called for accountability, activist circles distributed timelines and witness accounts. Small gatherings formed in front of the police department, not angry mobs, but quiet assemblies of people holding signs, carrying flags, and passing around printed statements. The mayor's office released a statement promising a full and fair review of departmental conduct. City officials echoed it, each pledging transparency, each avoiding specifics. Jarrett did not join them. He did not speak at press conferences, did not stand in front of cameras, did not lead chants or raise his fist. He went back to work. Each morning he arrived at the Veteran Rehabilitation Center before sunrise, wearing his pressed khaki uniform, his boots clean, his bearing unchanged. He met with wounded soldiers, taught breathing drills, monitored physical progress, and offered quiet, grounded presence. He asked for nothing, he said little, but his silence carried weight. Inside the police department, pressure built. Officer Hobbs and his partner were placed under internal review. The department opened their personnel files, and beneath the surface, they found patterns, past complaints that had gone unanswered, civilian statements ignored or buried, body cam footage that had once disappeared. Now, with public attention focused and legal counsel circling, those files resurfaced. Witnesses from the night of Jarrett's arrest stepped forward, submitting official statements. The teenager who had recorded the video was interviewed by an internal affairs investigator. His footage, once just a viral clip, was now evidence in an expanding inquiry. The footage showed every moment in stark clarity. No resistance, no provocation, just methodical escalation. In Washington, retired Generals Haywood, Thompson, and Aguilar remained engaged. They participated in closed-door discussions with Pentagon, liaison, and legal advisors. They drafted memoranda and shared testimony about Jarrett's service, his discipline, his character. One of them issued a personal letter to the governor of Washington, calling the incident a failure of civilian oversight and a dishonor to military service. It landed hard. Within weeks, procedural reviews began in precincts across the county. Commanders received new directives on risk evaluation, response protocol, and vetting of use of force incidents. Training programs were revised. Officers were required to attend updated de-escalation seminars. None of it happened with fanfare, but inside briefing rooms and training halls, the foundation of practice began to shift. In Spokane itself, the atmosphere remained tense, but no longer stagnant. At city council meetings, residents spoke up. Discussions that had once been tabled were revived. Proposals for accountability boards and community oversight made their way into public hearing dockets. The word trust echoed often on paper from microphones inside conversations. It was no longer a vague ideal. It had become a demand. Though Jarrett said nothing publicly, people noticed. At the market, strangers nodded respectfully. At the gym, younger veterans followed his quiet example. His name became a point of reference, not for rebellion, but for quiet defiance, for integrity held under pressure. What he had endured became part of the city's collective reckoning. Change had not arrived in sweeping declarations. It had come in slow, precise movements, each one echoing the way Jarrett had walked down his front steps that night. Not loud, but unmistakable. 2 months after the incident, the internal investigation reached its conclusion. Officer Hobbs was formally dismissed from duty. The report cited violations of departmental protocol, abuse of authority, and falsification of arrest documentation. His partner received a written reprimand and was reassigned to an administrative role far from street patrol. There were no public apologies, no televised statements, just a silent transfer of consequence from paper to reality. The city returned to its usual rhythm, but something beneath the surface had shifted. On the streets of East Central Spokane, residents walked with new eyes. Uniforms were no longer met with passive deference. People filmed more, they asked questions. Conversations at barbershops and diners circled around rights and procedures, around dignity and restraint. A cautious awareness had settled in, not loud, not rebellious, but persistent. Jarrett Eccles remained distant from the noise. He declined. Requests for interviews. Journalists reached out, authors sent inquiries, producers hinted at stories to be told. He refused them all. He did not see himself as a symbol. He saw no value in explaining what should have already been understood. He continued his routine unchanged, arriving early to the rehab center, checking the mail, walking his dog, nodding politely to neighbors. He made one exception. At the request of a local police academy instructor, he attended a closed session with a group of cadets nearing graduation. The room was plain, the air still. He stood at the front of the class in a worn gray sweater and spoke without notes. He said little, just enough. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point fingers. He looked each cadet in the eyes before leaving. That was all. As winter settled in, the city took on its usual hush. Trees stood bare. The sidewalks grew slick with frost. On Christmas morning, Jarrett received a letter in a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a short message of thanks from the man he had defended on the night of the arrest. Tucked alongside it was a photograph, father and daughter, smiling in a backyard, a dog tugging gently on its leash. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, were 4 words, "You made this possible." Jarrett held the photo for a long moment. Then he slid the letter back into the envelope and placed it in the bottom drawer of his desk, beneath a stack of old papers. He closed the drawer without ceremony. The room was quiet. His dog lay curled by the window, half asleep, ears twitching to the faint sound of wind outside. Beyond the glass, snow fell in fine, steady patterns. The world, in its larger shape, remained imperfect. But in the space that surrounded him, the fear had lessened, not erased, but softened. There was a little more weight behind every glance, a little more pause before action, and that, for now, was enough.